Welcome, everyone. Noe, can you go to the first slide? Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for the public workshop on our draft data guidelines version 4.0. The agenda today, we just have two items. First, we'll be presenting the significant changes from version 3.2 to this version 4.0, and then we will have time for public comment. Go ahead. So I just want to thank everyone for participating. The more participation we get, the better the guidelines get. So thank you guys for taking your time. Just a quick safety message to please know your surroundings and be aware of a safe way to exit if that's needed. Speak up if you need help. We're all virtual here. So if you feel that something's wrong and you need help, raise your hand, put it in the chat and speak up. Now I will let you guys know who's going to be presenting today. So for the presentation of significant changes, I am Jenny Reed. I'm one of the supervisors in the data analytics division, and I will be presenting on section 2 in the guidelines, those changes. Brian Bishop, one of our research data specialists, will be presenting on the GIS portion. It'll come back to me for the tabular portion, section 4, and then I'll hand it off to Clayton, who is going to do a drill down on, yeah, you'll see him when he's talking, the camera should go over there. He'll do a drill down on some of the details for the workbook templates. Go ahead, Millie. How to participate. Okay, so for audio comments, please use the raise hand feature if you are in the Teams on the web, in the webinar. If you are dialing in today, when you called in, there should have been audio instructions for what number to press if you want to raise your hand. If you missed that instruction or it wasn't provided, please put something in the comment and someone will find out and help you. And then for written comments, you can use the Q&A or the comment feature on the web. So I also want to ask that when it comes to questions and comments, we're going to have a chance for clarifying questions at the end of each section or end of the review of significant changes for each guideline section. We ask that you keep those questions to like clarifying specific questions about the section that was just covered. And if you have prepared comments or statements, to please save those for the public comment item. Okay, let's kick it off straight into section 2. So section 2 is the section that applies to all the data sets. And so the changes that are here are going to be more high level. One of the changes is the removal of QDR verbiage throughout. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know that we use QDR as a kind of shortcut for the data submission, quarterly data report. Given the second item on the slide, the switch to multiple cadence submission schedule, QDR does not really apply anymore as a universal term. So you will see that removed. And if you don't see it removed somewhere, please let us know. I think I already caught one place where it's still in there. So one of the main changes in this version revision is the switch to multiple submission cadences. I want to first point out that this only affects the tabular data. The GIS data submission is unaffected. The 3 cadences, first, what you're most familiar with, quarterly data submission. So the dates for quarterly submission remain unchanged. That cadence is the same. The first of the new submissions is the annual end of year submission. And that occurs with the Q4 submission. And then the annual WMP data submission, which occurs 3 days prior to submission of a base WMP or a WMP update submission. And we will get into what comprises each of those further along in the workshop. Changes to section 2.3 on file naming. So these changes are primarily to distinguish the different submissions the different new submission types from each other. So in the past, when we only had a quarterly submission, we would just ask you guys to indicate the year and the quarter in the file name. But now we ask that you indicate the year and like a short indicator that we've provided for which data set the submission pertains to, quarter for quarterly, and where you'll still submit or you'll still indicate the quarter for the reporting period. End of year, which indicates that that's the end of year submission for that year. And then for the WMP, this is newer concept that the year indicated in the file name matches the related WMP year. And again, there's more detail on that provided if you have questions about it. So for section 2.4 regarding revisions to previously submitted data, this remains mostly unchanged. The main revisions to this section have to do with handling revisions to the annual WMP data submission, because everyone's used to, the kind of how to revise quarterly data submissions, but understanding how to do that and when it's appropriate relative to the annual WMP data submission is a little bit different. So the language in this section that's new clarifies the relationship between the WMP document and the related data submissions. Revision 0 of this data set will always reflect what an EC has proposed in its initial WMP submission. So when a base WMP is submitted to the department, the corresponding data set will be revision 0, and that will reflect what the EC has documented, has reported in its base WMP as it's submitted. Revisions 1 and onward will reflect the energy safety approved WMP. So, when there are changes to targets and projections through that evaluation and decision process, there will be corresponding revisions to reflect what was approved in the final document. Also, revisions might indicate error corrections, like say an EC realizes that a target in the data submission just didn't match what was in the WMP, and that was an error. So, that would get revised through the revision process. But other than those indicators, the actual process of providing the revision is the same. Timeframes. So this is interesting. Section 2.5. There aren't a lot of changes here, but again, the main language changes have mostly to do with the annual WMP data set, this new data set, because having these multiple cadences clarifies the data time frame. The quarterly and annual end of year data sets, those are reporting on events, activities, expenditures that actually happened, took place in the specified reporting period. And then by teasing out the targets, projections, and risk data that are reported, that helps to clarify that, those aren't reporting on things that have happened. That's reporting on commitments that are made in the WMP. Then just throughout, as usual, there are changes for clarity. Some of these have to do with clarity regarding consistency between the data submissions and the WMP submission. Some of them have to do with consistency between the GIS data sets and the tabular data sets. And then their general language changes for clarity and consistency throughout. So this is now the first time for questions. If there are any clarifying questions on section 2 and what I have presented so far. And you can raise your hand if you want. Everyone should have permission to use the written chat or Q&A. I don't believe that needs to be unlocked. Okay. I will put that down. Okay.
That was new. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably testing them out.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any questions now. If you think of something, it's okay to ask in the other sections, that as long as it's something we've already covered. And then again, in the public comment, obviously you are free to make whatever comments or questions you'd like. Go ahead, Noe. So now we're gonna proceed to the review of significant changes in section 3, the GIS data submission, and Brian will speak on that. Go ahead, Noe.
Thank you, Jenny, and this will be very brief. This is not exhaustive, but overall, the changes that we've made in the GIS data section or the spatial data section with this guidelines update I would categorize them really mostly in my last couple of bullet points, which apply to the whole section, as we're correcting errors that have been caught. We've unfortunately continued to have some discrepancies between what the guidelines state and what the fields in the geodatabase template have been, either on names or domain options or field types. So, ECs have been very helpful in pointing those out, and I appreciate that. I always appreciate that feedback. So we fixed that, and we've done some language clarification that doesn't actually affect any change. It just clarifies what our intent was originally, because we've had some questions. So I know I started at the end there, but just kind of examples of some specific changes. And as I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but we have added an industrial meter type option that just aligns the data we're collecting, the spatial data, with what had always been collected in the wildfire mitigation data tables. Thanks to a helpful comment catch from one of the EC reps, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was specifically, or I would give you credit personally, but we have respecified what used to be the asset ID field in the camera feature to, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. What used to be the support structure ID field in the camera feature is now a more generic asset ID. And there's a corresponding field to say what type of asset that is. The broadest, I guess, most significant is just a removal. We've removed nearly all of the fields that used to collect information about target and progress information for initiatives, because that information was all redundant to information we're getting as tabular data, and that's not a best practice. And so we're just removing that. We're doing this the way that we should be doing it. We're not requesting those data to be basically duplicated into spatial data anymore. There is one add sort of relevant to that. There is an added field for point initiative data only if the point represents more than one unit. That is something that would need to be in the spatial data to translate that point back to the target progress numbers in the non-spatial data. So we've added that to help that make that explicit if needed. It's not a requirement that points could represent multiple. It would be acceptable to also report multiple points. So we're just giving flexibility there. We've blanket added another comment field. Essentially, it's called field notes, but it is essentially a comment field. It's not required. Any information can go in there. And again, that's just to provide more flexibility for ECs to provide more information. We've had feedback both from some of our field inspectors and from some of the ECs that more flexibility there would help clarify activities when different things are being done under the same initiative or utility initiative tracking ID. And then again, just another minor one. And Aaron, I did just see your comment. It flashed. I didn't get to read it, so I'll get to that in just a second. Just my last bullet point here is that we added some more device options that were requested. Again, this is good feedback from ECs that we did not have a good exhaustive list in the isolation device type. So hopefully we have corrected that, or at least we've moved in the right direction. If there are any others missing, we'd like to hear about it. Can we?
So if they're written comments, we can just do it at the end because they're just here. So
Okay, your preference.
not the end of just the end of your slide.
Well, that's the end of my slide.
Oh, okay. There we go.
We're done.
Okay, so
I saw Aaron's comment
here.
or question flash, so I'd like to, and I'm going to read it in case anyone is not looking at the chat. So the question was, can you? Yeah, I won't put her on the spot.
Oh, I think, is that Aaron?
It is.
Yeah,
Well,
okay, so I can unmute you. Aaron.
Okay, Aaron, if you want, we will put you on the spot.
Okay.
I was trying to be nice, Jenny.
I know, but it's Aaron's fault because she unmuted or raised hand. Okay, can you talk now?
She looks still muted to me, Jenny.
No, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, there.
Oh,
Yep.
there you go.
Morning. I think you're remuted, Aaron.
There, am I good?
Yes.
Yeah, now
we
you're
hear
good.
you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so Erin from SDG&E. So a couple things. So one is just, yeah, my question there was just some more explanation as to why we didn't add units represented to the other feature classes. And I do have more to say as to why we would want it, but I just wanted to see if there was a reason behind it.
Nope, failure of imagination on my part, so,
Okay.
that fix, we can do that.
Yeah.
We still pretty do that, right, Jen?
Just go ahead and,
Yeah.
we'll note if you want to provide,
Mhm.
what all you want to see the units represented added to. You
Yeah.
can written comments or, just note down.
I'll just make it a blanket.
I think just given that it's
I'm not-
optional, having it applicable to every initiative feature class is helpful. We use on our vegetation side, we report our data per tree, like unit, or sorry, per tree point, but that tree will represent multiple units. So for veg, it's very important. You know, we get into the grid hardening line side, that's where we track our number of miles. So you have your shape length, but you also have your measured length. If that it may be the same, it may be slightly different. We don't have anywhere to put that anymore as well without that field. So we heavily use it. And I think, Brian, this takes us back years in conversation with yourself and Stephen Lai, with respect to how to track units. And we've been using quarterly progress in that way for quite some time now. So just having this all throughout would be super helpful. And we do use that to sum, and that is what equals our quarterly actual each quarter, is by summing that number of units.
Okay, no, that's helpful to hear.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did not have a well thought out reason for not adding it. Again, it
Okay.
to me in regard to points and then did not seem to be relevant to other geometries, but I hear you. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, without committing to making that change, we'll definitely
Perfect.
see. I don't see that should be an issue.
Great. Thank you. And I do see you said added industrial meter type, but I don't see it under customer. I'm assuming that was for customer meter. I don't see it there. Or where were you intending to add industrial meter type?
That should be there so that.
Yeah, so the documentation still
check on
says
that.
residential, non-residential. So just as a point there.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out.
No problem.
I don't have a good answer on why that is, but
Okay, I can put a note in the chat if you'd prefer, or you guys got that.
I'm making my own notes, but thank you.
Awesome.
That, going back to the earlier one, since you brought it up, was there anything else on the, like the format or the length of the field, or did my change number of units?
I
That
think,
account-
Brian, I'm not sure we got the length of the field because the geodatabase wasn't provided as a template.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we would get that unless it was in that change list, and I'm just gonna open it up to see if I missed that.
I doubt it. So that's a good point. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
This morning.
Yeah.
If you have any particular suggestions on that, I'm open to hearing them. So however you want to make that. If you don't, that's also fine. But if you did,
Mhm.
if you think about it, I'm not to put you on the spot right now, but if you go back and think about
Yeah.
it and you say, hey, we really like it to be this type and this length, just let us know.
Yeah,
Okay.
or any.
Yep.
Or anyone else. Yeah, sorry, not
Yeah,
giving anything here.
Okay, definitely, I'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
Okay, next in the chat, there's a question from Samuel Polino. The comment says, for table 3 annual WMP data submission schedule, is the submission date 3 days or 30 days prior to WMP submission? The guidelines conflict within the same section. Sorry for going back to section 2. I will double check on that. I thought it was 3 days. But I will double check and just make sure that there isn't, might have been changed, and then I don't want to lose the thread of that. So we will, I will check given the question and your interest in the question, if it's just about the conflicting information, thank you for pointing it out, and we'll correct it to the correct time. If there are concerns or comments about between those two, please make them known, because I think it would be helpful to understand how you guys are thinking about that, about providing the data set ahead of the WMP submission. And if you have comments or concerns about the time frame there, we would want to know about that. So you can do that here or in the written comments for the public comment period. There is a question from Jonathan Morales. For GIS data, when can the IOUs expect the schema version 4.0 geodatabase template standard, data standard field definition sheet, status report distributed? Brian?
I was gonna ask you, I believe what we said was, I know you and I kind of we went a little bit back and forth on this, but we wanted to not have a template until we were sure that our changes were final, because then we get versioning things, but I don't, when,
I mean, the geodatabase template is incorporated in the guidelines, and when they're adopted, it has to be posted.
yeah,
So
I then absolutely.
yeah, it will not be, you know, we're not gonna make guidelines and not have the geodatabase template available.
And same for the status report. I will say I do understand that not having it with the draft is probably, is not ideal, and I did do that intentionally to avoid, again, having a draft 4.0 template and then a final 4.0 template, but I think next time we'll have to do better on that.
Yeah, I
Because
think
it's helpful for them. So I'll take the blame for that. It was a choice on my part and probably not the best choice. I do have a question though, because I don't know what a data standard field definition sheet is. That's not a formal part of our guidelines. I think I know what it may refer to, but I don't know if Jonathan is available to
clarify.
come off mute and clarify, but
Which, is it just a field constraint? That's in the.
I don't,
Okay.
it's not that, those words in that order aren't
Oh,
anything.
Jonathan, you have raise your hand, please, and then I can give you permission to unmute yourself. All right, 1 second. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh, awesome. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. I think you remuted yourself, Jonathan, or maybe that just happens.
No, this keeps happening.
Okay, so what's that?
Sorry,
How about,
people.
how about now? Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry
All right,
about that.
perfect. I'll keep an eye on my microphone as I talk. Yeah, the data standard field definition incorporates all of the field types, field lengths, and all of the actual definitions of each field within the GDB. All of those fields used to be inherent in the GDB template, but you guys removed it to a external spreadsheet maybe about 2 schemas
Okay.
ago.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought you were referring to. So, yeah, that is I have provided unofficially, because it is not, I just want to clarify, this is not officially part of the guidelines. It's not, we don't adopt it. It doesn't carry any,
Like regulatory
Yeah.
kind of significance or power.
but I'm aware that it's helpful. So I have created a version of my internal document, which is what keeps me sane when I'm preparing all these things, because it's important that the guidelines, the template, and the status report match. So there's a master, I do keep a master spreadsheet, and that name for it, and that's fine, it doesn't bother me, but I think somebody probably renamed it. That's not what I call it. So that's why I was just wanted to clarify. So yeah, I can continue to provide that. It's not again, it's a thing that I prepare because it keeps me straight. So I'll provide an updated version of that. But again, all that and the geodatabase template and the status report were all basically waiting for me to be sure that we had a final set of changes. And again, that's just about me preserving my own sanity in this with 3 or 4 different things that all.
Since that's just kind of given as like helpful information, if there's anyone else who wants to have that, can you just reach out to Brian and let them know?
Yes, and that's what they've always done in the past. Again, we don't put that on the website because it's not official, so we don't want to confuse
Yeah.
anyone, but I've notified people about it in meetings before, and it's a thing that I can share.
Okay.
And we may have to come up with a better way to do that, and possibly just parking it in everyone's drop folders would be
Okay.
I'm thinking on the fly here, but and then there was a question about NAs, and then I think we're done with GIS questions. And do you want me to read that one? The question was that someone noticed an NA in the isolating device for risk events. There will always be one. Is there any particular reason that? I would have to look back at old notes from one of our quarterly check-ins, but that is the opposite of feedback that off the top of my head, I believe that is the opposite of feedback I had heard from someone else in an EC who said that there was a possibility of having a risk event where no isolating device operated. And so that was why we had added that, because I don't believe that used to be there. But this is all from memory. So that's my off the top of my head answer as to why that's added. But I will check on the versions and when that got added and look at my notes and see if I can figure out, because I do remember there was a conversation about this and I don't remember all the details of the conversation.
I think also, so if you could clarify, I think the commenter is Binal Harik. If you could clarify, you know, either now or later, if you're interested in any concerns about the NA. So if it's just an option, maybe it applies to a different EC or one EC and not all. So if there are concerns there, then just maybe elaborate on that in your later comments or in your written comments. It looks like that's all the questions for now. If anyone else wants to raise their hand or ask anything. Okay, here we go. Aaron. Just a note that change order still exists in section 36362. Thank you. Thank you. We are, that's another one that's on our punch list to double check, global check for change order references. Can we, Minal, what organization are you from? You don't have to let us know, but it helps us to understand the context of your question. SCG&E, okay. So it might be that SCG&E does not have any circumstances where you would use NA in that field. So, you know, Brian can follow up and look, you know, I'm imagining it was a different EC who raised the issue. So, you know, it could just be that your organization would not ever have that possibility, but another organization might. And if, okay. And then, thank you. I see the note, Aaron, about the typo. And again, the note about the change order reference. Thank you. Oh, Aaron, I see your hand up. Hold on. Oh, you're still allowed.
Okay. Perfect. I was just gonna type it, but I do have 2 items from that were previously requested. Can I bring those up quickly? They're not large topics.
Is this regarding the GIS guidelines?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so high wind warning, I think we have requested in the past just to add the fire weather zone ID. Brian, I don't know if you remember that, but red flag warning has it, and high wind warning just didn't get that field in there the last time we had a change. So we were requesting to have the fire weather zone ID added.
Yeah,
And I can, okay.
What I can add it as optional, but as we've said before, if
Sure.
you have it, it's also fine with us if you
Yeah.
add it. With us if you
Yep.
add fields.
Okay, yeah,
You're
I
good.
was just thinking that for alignment with red flag warning, but maybe there was a reason why it was excluded.
The reason is I don't have a good reason why it was included for red flag warning. So when
Oh,
I
I see.
see what I'm saying, like I have a policy, I have a general policy of not changing things are somewhat arbitrarily, because I know it, even if we're removing something that's not needed, it's making you guys change your ETL potentially.
Mhm,
But if I'm
mhm.
adding a new feature and I don't see a reason why it existed in the first place, I'm not gonna make you do it a second. Does that make sense?
Yes, okay,
And
okay,
Then you're right. I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, because then that makes it confusing as to why it's in one place and not the other. So I'm talking through it here with you, but I'm not claiming it's the best logic that's ever been come up with. But that's the reason. And if you want to add it as
Yeah.
or go ahead and add it, it's not gonna bother me.
okay, okay, sounds good. So I won't bring that one up again. Grid hardening line, last submission or last revision, there were changes from asset OHUG to asset location on the point side. This is the one that was changed on the line side, but we brought up that asset location doesn't align with primary distribution line, transmission line. It's still asset OHUG and only has overhead and underground as options. So we had asked that, I think when the last version was out, if that was a mistake, and that it should actually be asset OHUG versus location and only have those 2 options.
In the line feature.
Correct. In the grid hardening line, yeah.
I think I probably, and I remember talking about this before, I think I
Yes.
probably still the last time didn't understand. And because I remember looking at this
Mhm.
and going, and it was months later and thinking, I remember the question and I don't see the issue. So let me look at it again.
Mhm.
In the moment right now, I'm understanding very clearly what you're pointing out. And I think you're probably correct.
Okay.
But
Did you
I
need
will-
a note on that or?
I'm making my own note.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
my note is literally saying to call you if when I look, makes sense. So I hope that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
I see Jonathan Morales, I see a question for section 2, table 2, annual end of year data submission schedule. Is the submission date February 1st? Why is the year specified? Hold on a second. Go back. Oops. So this is annual. Maybe clarify the question. So the end of year data submission will be February 1st every year. So, it'll be February 1st, 2025 will be the annual end of year submission for 2024. Like the same way that the core Q4 submission is on that day. The annual end of year submission aligns with the Q4 submission. They just are different data because the quarterly data set, only includes data that are reported quarterly, and then the annual, which is primarily the financial stuff. That it used to be that the ECs would have to submit just blank, because the financials aren't reported out until the end of the year. So we don't want to have, submitting blank data. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good way to collect that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was Nelson's question from above. I was just repasting it because I think it got skipped. Sorry about that.
Oh, it did. It scrolled past.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, I see it. Yeah. Okay. So Nelson, if that didn't answer, please chime in, or you can chime in later again if needed. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Okay, Brian. Bishop. Here, I'm typing it in. Oh, are you doing it?
No, what? Sorry.
I'm typing in your email.
Oh, sorry. I heard my name.
I'll play and typo it. Brian.bishop@energysafety.gov.
That's
Yeah, there you go. Okay. If anyone else, if anyone thinks of more questions about the GIS section, you can still bring them up. And of course, there's the public comment item at the end. So let's move on. All right, section 4, the tabular data. So this is going to be kind of a drill down into all the changes that were alluded to in section 2. We already introduced the multiple submission cadences, and each of those cadences has a corresponding template workbook. So similar to how we've had the tables 1 through 15 template workbook, now there's a template workbook for each submission, cadence for each data set. Okay, I see that comment and we will get to that in the questions section. So there is a quarterly template workbook that is for reporting of actuals in the listed tables and open work orders for table 13, which are actual open work orders, but maybe not what we traditionally think of as actuals when we think of reporting. The annual end of year template workbook allows for reporting of financial actuals. And then the annual WMP template workbook is for projections, targets, and risk data as reported in a WMP submission with the reference tables. So the main thing that you'll notice is that the tables are the same. The reported data is the same. It's just teased apart for clarity and to implement some cleaner data practices. Go ahead, Noe. And there's a special element to the annual WMP template workbook in that it has 3 versions. So there is a different version for each, or I should say there is a version of the template workbook for each WMP cycle year 1, year 2, and year 3. And that is simply to eliminate the years that have already passed. So we don't want to be collecting, past projections in the new submission, like kind of relitigating year 1 when it's year 2. I see a hand, and I will, please keep your hand up and we will do questions at the end. Try not to forget, or you can put your question in the chat. Go ahead, Noe. So in this section, common table elements are identified in section 4.3.2. These will be fields and table elements that are consistent across the data sets. And then following from there, there's the presentation of the table structure for each table. And this is different now because there are tables that exist in multiple data sets. So at the beginning of each, table structure subsection, it starts with identifying the fields that are common to the multiple data sets of that table, if that applies. And then it will go into the fields that are exclusive to a given data set. So there could be up to potentially like 3 different tables in there, just looking at the fields and going into the details about, okay, in the quarterly data set, there's just these fields. Usually it's like the actuals field. And then, in the annual WMP data set, there are these fields, the projection fields, right? And the things that are common to those 2 would be an example like the initiative details. So that is just kind of the structure of how table 4 handles this switch to multiple data sets, multiple workbooks. Go ahead, Noe. Okay, so actually before I hand off to Clayton, let's go ahead and let you ask this question in case it's about something I just said. Okay, I just unmuted you. I can't see your full name. Swenson. Oh, Melissa Swenson. You should be, or I just allowed you to unmute yourself. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you wish to comment or ask a question. You're still muted if you're trying to speak.
Okay.
Oh,
there?
I hear you. Yep.
Okay, good. It keeps sort of flipping back and forth. So Melissa Swenson with Pacific Corp. Thank you so much for going through this. I have a clarification on the WMP template filing, the data files there. We are also seeing in the WMP guidelines that all of the tables in the WMP filing are also required to be filed separately in an Excel file.
Okay, so
I am wondering why we are filing 2 separate sets of Excel files, and one may have a slightly different deadline than the other.
So I can't, like with full authority, speak to the WMP requirements, but my understanding is that those tables are referring to the tables that are in the PDF document. So as you know, in the PDF document, there are tables contained in there. Those tables do not correspond to data submission tables. They never have. There's some overlapping information. They're not structured the same way. It's not how we handle our data. They're mostly designed for reviewers and for the public to have an easy way of looking at, certain information that makes sense with the WMP narrative. They're not designed for data processing and for storing data over time or any of that. So I can't totally speculate as to why ESPD wanted those tables in Excel. It's probably just to make the information easier to access, but it is not the same information as the annual WMP data submission. So it's kind of like saying, if we hadn't changed this at all, and we just still had a QDR, which had all the projections and stuff that the annual WMP data submission now has, those were never the same thing, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it does. What I am perhaps suggesting is it would be helpful if from a consistency and making sure we're not missing something, if all the tables were in one Excel workbook and that the deadline was the same for all of it. Because on one side of energy safety, we've got a request to submit some of the data in one format, potentially 3 days earlier. And then we've also got another Excel workbook dealing with the templates in the WMP that's due at the time of the WMP. So maybe some consolidation and standardization of deadlines. I welcome some consideration of that.
Okay, if you could kind of put more, if any of this can be in like part of your written comments that you submit, it would be helpful. Just because, especially because your question and your request involves multiple divisions that control different guidelines for different purposes. So like the data guidelines purpose is for, reporting these data, storing them over time, providing products to staff so that they can review the data. It's really different from, what comes in a PDF, right? And the PDF document. And then of course, we're always trying to be consistent between those things. So, in trying to address your question, it would be really helpful to understand kind of your concerns, and why it impacts your organization, why it's difficult or, kind of onerous.
Yeah, I think it's helpful.
I think I get where you're coming from, but
yeah, but think of it from the perspective of in both documents, we are submitting targets and objectives. It would be super helpful if we were submitting all the other data in the same way, in the same format at the same time.
Okay. Can I ask you, was this a concern, if the kind of previously, when there was not a requirement to submit Excel tables, with, reflecting the PDF tables, so if it was just the PDF document with the in-doc tables, do you have the same concern?
I think, so I wasn't here for the filing in 2023, so I can't speak to that specifically. I am looking at it as an opportunity to make sure that we are consistent and not missing anything or potentially in error getting data from the WMP, which also belongs in the tables that you're requesting, that we miss something.
Thank you, that helps to understand. Someone else, I see a question maybe. Okay, I'm gonna look. We have some questions and I just want to see if we should probably get to those before Clayton does a deep dive into the template workbook pages. So I see the question about section 2.4, discussing revisions to previous submitted data. Yeah, please do hold that. We'll come back to that in the public comment. For annual WMP data submission, are we submitting for the 26-28 WMP cycle? So this question from Lena McMillan, for annual WMP data submission, are we submitting for the 2026 to 2028 WMP cycle? I would ask that these data guidelines be reviewed against the WMP technical guidelines for overlap and redundancy. The WMP guidelines also require that we submit all performance metrics in Excel files. So I think this is similar to the question that was just asked. The submission of an Excel file relating to the in-doc WMP tables is new. It has nothing to do with our data collection. And I will add that the data that is being collected in the annual WMP submission is the exact same data that has always been collected in the QDR. So it is nothing new. And the only new element here is that there is an Excel file now required to reflect the PDF tables. And the purpose of that, I cannot speculate to, but I will reach out to ESPD. It's my understanding that comments for the draft WMP guidelines have been submitted. So it's possible that these comments are more appropriate for that, since that is the actual new element. Although we've broken out into this annual WMP submission, the data that's being reported is not new. So I hope that kind of clarifies, because I recognize that now that it's an Excel file, it's kind of being looked at as data. but it is not part of the kind of data reporting. It's more of a tool that has to do with what's in the PDF document. So if that kind of clarifies a little bit. As far as the detail about submitting for the cycle, that is detailed in the draft data guidelines, how the annual WMP submission relates to the cycle. So the answer would be yes. The annual WMP data submission pertains to each WMP cycle, and there is a submission for each cycle year. There's a version of the template workbook for cycle year 1, cycle year 2, and cycle year 3. So one would be for really targets and projections for the full WMP, and then version year 2 would be for the corresponding year 2 update. For 3, the corresponding year 3 update. When are actuals currently reported for table 11? So yes, the version 3.2 actuals for table 11 were reported with before. And the guidelines don't change that. It just pulls them apart from the quarterly so that electric corporations are not reporting blanks for financial actuals every quarter. Some of the data in the WMP guidelines. In the data guide, okay, so this is a question from Lena again. Some of the data in the data guidelines and the WMP guidelines is the same. We understand the multiple uses of multiple parties using the data. It is duplicative when it is the same data. So I think I've kind of addressed this, but I will add that the purposes of my understanding, having been here for a few years, is that the WMP document is read and accessed, differently. It's not always helpful for stakeholders or the public or even evaluators to have all data, all figures only in data sets that have to be processed. Some of that is elevated through the use of tables in the document itself. And I think there are, justifications for that. So I think that if you have further comment on that, maybe something a little more detailed and nuanced in written comments for the public comment period on the draft data guidelines would be appreciated. And it's something that the department can look at in terms of, how bigger picture, how the data guidelines and the WMP guidelines, that document and the corresponding reporting data reporting relate. And that would be super helpful. Yep, and I understand the consistency questions and the concerns. Thank you. Okay, I think we covered. If I missed anything in the chat, I was scrolling back to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think we got everything there. And just to kind of reorient to where we are in section 4, this is the portion of the guidelines where it goes into table by table subsection. So Clayton is going to now take the reins and talk a little bit more about these template workbooks and how they're different from the single workbook that you guys have had in the past.
Right, so hi everybody, I'm Clayton Strong, also the research data specialist here at Energy Safety. And I'm going to go over kind of how the templates themselves just look different. Like if you open the thing up and you look at any of these draft templates, you might go, oh, these are really different. They're actually not different data collection, but the structure, the format has changed a little bit. So I wanted to talk through that because this will affect more, it'll affect like the ETL scripting and any kind of, if you have contractors working on that or stuff like that, you'll need to like kind of rework it and either, map from your old data, you send it into the old template and then you send it into the new one, or you just like restructure it a little bit. So I'll talk through all the different changes, at least the major ones. There's a few other kind of details. This isn't quite exhaustive because some of the tables change specifically, but I'll hit on the main things that we've changed. So the first one has to do with this multiple cadences thing, which is just that the annual WMP template is a little bit different than the other ones. The quarterly template and the end of year template will basically stay fixed throughout time. Like those are the same every quarter. And we'll actually explain how that, includes the quarter data, which we previously had in part of the template. But this one, you basically cut off the years of the past. You don't project for the past years. So in year 1, you're projecting for all 3 years of the cycle. In year 2, you're just projecting the next 2 years. In year 3, you're just projecting the last year. So that's all that this is. That's why there's 3 versions. Next slide, please. But the templates themselves do look a little bit different. So here's just a picture of the old template and the new template. You'll see that there's a bunch of changes. I'll go through them basically one at a time, but we've got like the big header is kind of gone. Some of the data is changed in shape. The columns are reordered. Some of the things are renamed. So I'll explain kind of why this is too as I go. All right, next slide, please. The basic gist of this is that we want this to be easier to ingest as like part of a database. We previously, these files were created and they were designed to be sort of dual purpose. They were both to like record for long-term storage and to be kind of more readable for like the average, policy reader. And we found that like that included a bunch of like redundant information, things that like we wanted to overwrite or not overwrite, but kept getting submitted. And so we've kind of slowly broken that out until this is more database-like. And this is kind of the biggest step so far in that is basically we are changing this to be look more of a pivot table. Yeah. So first thing is formatting changes. Basically all this stuff in red is just cut out. So we're simplifying the templates by cutting out unnecessary formatting rows and columns. So now the headers are the first row, and the data is all the rows afterwards, and there's no stuff above the headers. So, and there's also no page format links or whatever that like, talk to each other. So instead, we're going to have the quarters like reported inside the data rather than as part of this header. Okay, and as you can see in there, the breakout of the two pieces, one goes to the quarterly table, one goes to the annual WMP table, but those basically are still in the same rows. They're just in different tables for these two columns because they're collected at different times. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the second change is to make this a little bit more database friendly. We basically remove the hard-coded year and quarter from the template. So if you remember in the old templates, we had like a year and a quarter at the top of the template, not in the one line either, which was a big source of confusion and challenges on our end, but also just having them built in meant that you had to get a new template every quarter. And that was very kind of tricky to keep track of. So now what we do is we just add a column, reporting year, reporting quarter, utility ID, who is submitting this and when. And that's part of the data set, so that we load this directly into our database, and now we know, where it comes from. So that's what's happening here. And so those are all going to be constant for every, EC. So it's not going to be like a lot of data you have to collect. It's just you add one thing into every, row of this. You add your utility ID, you add your year, your quarter, that kind of thing. All right, next slide, please. So this is what it looks like afterwards. Okay, another change that we made was to the metric number. This was kind of used as a pseudo index for the tables, but unfortunately it was not actually an index because it was not unique. There was occasional repeats, which made it unusable as an index. So what we've done is we've kind of reworked it. So instead of having this somewhat opaque string with a bunch of different letters that represent different categories, we are just replacing it with an integer. And this integer has a specific format. So it's a 7-digit integer. The first one just tells you which template it is. The second one tells you which table within that template from 1 to 15. And then the third thing is just what row number it is. So the row numbers are all going to, start from 0, go up to whatever the length is. And that'll help us find the specific entry if we need to do a change order, if we need to do anything like that. We're not using the word change order.
Not change order.
Yeah. If we need to change something, this is how we identify the row that we're going to swap out. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is what it looks like now. And the last thing, and this is probably a big change for ETL stuff, is just reordering and renaming the columns. If you're using specific column, go to cell C5 and that's where you put this, you'll probably need to rework where those go. Because we're basically reordering and renaming the columns. We're changing the formatting so they all use the same kind of style, which is all caps with spaces. We were previously using camel case on some tables. We were using just regular text with a capital at the beginning of a sentence in some tables. We were using title case in some tables, and it was very confusing. So keeping it in one thing and trying to simplify this so the same names are used as much as possible. We also removed the required data all to the one side of the table. So the left side is all pre-formatted template stuff that cannot be changed. And the right side in ones that have a template. Some of these don't, some of them you add in your own rows like table 1, table 12, initiative stuff. But when there is a template, basically the template stuff is all on the left. The stuff filled in by the electrical corporation is all on the right. So things like units being on the side and having like data in between template stuff is all changed or moved. But the data is all the same. That's being collected. Okay, that's all. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like now. And then next slide, please. So this is the end result, new templates. This is looking at, I think this is table 5 in particular. Yeah, this is. So this is just an example. They've all changed somewhat like this with a couple of additional changes to specific ones that, you know, you can find in the changelog or in the red line from the previous versions of the data guidelines. But the tables all represent the same things. Mostly what has happened is sometimes rows have been cut that we no longer need to collect because we don't have to fit everything into one format. So projections and annuals or projections and quarterly data can be like slightly different templates. So next slide, please. I do want to talk about a few things that are actually slightly different data. This is not really because we're collecting new data or changing anything on our end, but this is just to align with the new version of the WMP. So the tables that track initiatives, tables 1, 11, and 12, have basically the names of the initiatives and the categories have been slightly changed. So if you look at Appendix C of the data guidelines, there's a new list of what the initiative name, initiative type, initiative category, and section that it's from in the WMP guidelines. So please do go through that and just make sure that this aligns with what it currently requires in the WMP guidelines and in the data guidelines, which will be slightly different, but mostly, you know, the same categories and the same initiatives will be, you know, pursued. And then in tables 14 and 15, kind of in a similar way, those are collecting information as risk scores for different like sections or different areas. And those things have also changed to reflect the data or the WMP guidelines that are requiring a little bit more detailed risk information. So things like PEDS exposure, like that kind of stuff wasn't collected before. So we've added those rows in or those columns. And so we want, you know, future data submissions just to align with what's required in the WMP. So these are the only data changes that would add, you know, add new things that would need to be reported. Everything else is just reordering, reworking. And if you have any questions about where something is that used to be somewhere, it's probably still in there. So, you know, you can always send me a message if you are not sure where or how to submit something. I see that I have one question here. I think, is this my last slide?
Yeah, can you go to the question slide? Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, we can take the question from
Nicholas Rapp.
Nicholas. Yeah.
Do you want me to unmute?
Sure.
Okay. So Nicholas, you're allowed to unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Hi, yep, Nick from Liberty.
Oh,
Okay.
did
you got
the-
remuted.
yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
It messed with you again,
No
sorry.
problem. Yep,
All right.
just a question about the initiative list change. I was reading through the guidelines this morning and trying to understand the change. So in the past, we've had changes that have kind of forced us to change our tracking of our internal initiative numbers, which has caused some confusion across departments. Is that what we're looking at here, or is it just the categories in the organization, like the names of those?
So can you clarify whether you're talking about the way that initiatives are referenced in the WMP document, or if you're just talking about like the utility tracking ID or other kinds of like data reference numbering?
I would say the latter, yeah, like the data reference numbering, the tracking numbers that we're using. I'm just trying to understand the change,
Okay.
like specifically what we're required to do.
Okay, so the utility ship tracking ID still exists, and that's still utility defined. So nothing that is changed here affects that. And I think maybe the confusion is coming in for how that relates to the metric number that Clayton went over, which is more of like an indexing thing. So go ahead, Clayton.
I think if I understand your question correctly, what you're saying is that you want to keep using the same initiative numbers and you don't want to have to like change that and have to like retroactively affect previous things. I think that still works. I think you can keep the same utility like tracking ID for specific initiatives. What might change is the name of the category that it's in. So if, you know, I don't have an example.
Yes, okay,
with,
so
but-
okay, if that's kind of what you're getting along, the purpose of the utility initiative tracking ID is to allow the connection, the through line on initiative work across years and potentially across, you know, WMP cycles. So like you're saying this is an initiative that we talked about before, this is the initiative tracking ID, like that's exactly how we want it to be used. And there's nothing in these guidelines that says that you have to change that utility initiative tracking ID. That is the way that you connect that across. So is that what you're talking about? Like, are we asking you to change that or?
Yeah, I think you've answered my question and kind of alleviated the concern, and I think that makes sense. So not worried about that, and I hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing other hands right now or new comments. So go ahead, Noe, and let us go to the next slide. And let's just go into the public comment period. So that concludes our review of the significant changes in the draft data value version 4.0. And this portion of the meeting is for public comment. If anyone still has clarifying questions, feel free to ask them now. And also if anyone has just like prepared statements or anything like that, this is the time to make those. So we will now watch for hands and for anything entered into the chat. Oh, I think okay. Melissa Boyd, I see your hand and I will allow you to unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Perfect. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, and it just remuted you again, did the sneaky thing. So
It does that.
I know we'll be talking with IT to hopefully figure that out. Sorry, guys. Thanks for your patience.
Not a problem. All right, Melissa Boyd here for PG&E. I wanted to provide comment and then perhaps discussion on the revision guidelines, section 2.4. So currently the way the revisions that we're interpreting it says if there are changes outside asset point and asset line data sets, that requires resubmission. And it does not also specify how back we would go, how far back in time. The reason why asset point and asset line, my understanding, are not required for resubmission is because we recognize that the grid is dynamic and changes every day. Hence, right, so if you were resubmitting based on asset point and asset line, there would be never ending resubmissions. We do have a problem though, where that same factor holds true also in our risk event data for unplanned outages, wires down, ignitions. And I'll give an example. There's a field called customer count. The way that field is derived is by looking at the assets that were part of the outage and then looking at the customer counts tied to those assets to derive the overall outage count. And we snapshot that right for this quarterly report to produce and provide a customer count of outages. But what ends up happening is if we reproduce that same historical event sometime later, we find that new customers have been added, customers have been removed that are associated with those assets. So then you end up, right, since the grid is dynamic, with different data points for the risk event, like you would find in asset point and asset line. This is true for what I understand SDG&E, SCE as well, that our grid is dynamic and hence is subject to change. So I'd like to propose, if for consideration, we can look at ways to help energy safety get what they are looking for, updated information or things that have changed related to risk events with rolling quarterly submissions reflecting cumulative year-to-date reporting. So for example, Q1 would represent months January through March. Q2 would represent January through June, right? Q3 would represent January through October, or through September, rather. That way, energy safety is getting the most up-to-date relevant information regarding risk events, and it is true. But at the same time, we're not reproducing endless QDRs, because I think we've had 18 submissions in total. And unfortunately, we're unable to tell you, like, differentiate between the types of data changes, because in each one of these quarterly reports, there can be 10,000 unplanned outages in a given quarter. So we don't have time to do the line by line review of what changed for each record and why.
Thanks for your comment, Melissa. I first want to clarify the reasoning behind why that revision approach is not taken with the asset data. And it isn't because it's always changing. It's because the purpose of the asset geospatial submission is to provide a snapshot of the assets at that point in time. So it's like the most current snapshot of the assets, and the decision to require that quarterly is intentional, so that we're not requiring you to give us a snapshot of your assets every day, right? We only are asking for it quarterly. That's the freshness that we are requiring. So that is really different from risk event data, which is event-based reporting. So the example that you gave about, customers impacted on an outage, that record should reflect the number of customers affected during that event. So if there are changes to the grid and that changes the number of customers, that would be like post outage, right? Like the outage actually happened at a certain point in time, and there were a number of customers that were impacted by that event. We don't want to know, a month later or a year later, if that event were to happen again, would the number of customers be the same? It's at that point in time, how many customers were affected. So, this sounds kind of more like, at least for that example, it's more like a data management thing. It could be that like how the system works is like you're kind of producing this, and because that number automatically, is showing current customers impacted by certain, elements of how the grid's connected, it's like, okay. But when a risk event occurs, that is event-based reporting, and we want to know about that event. Now, we do understand that like knowledge of an event evolves. So, there could be something that was unknown. I think the most common example that we get is like what precipitated that event, right? Like it might be unknown, and then, that gets found out later. The feedback that we've gotten from the program side is that the department needs to know that information. So, if it's unknown and then later it becomes known, we need to know that information. So we have to tease apart a little bit, I think, the goals versus the reasons for the revisions. Some of what's getting discussed, like it's not really appropriate, like, with the customer counts, but this question of like submitting many revisions versus, I think what you're kind of hinting at is we've been asked for what's called like a true up. So that's, I think, the term that's been thrown around, like an end of year true up, or maybe it's like a rolling true up, where instead of saying like, okay, we're only going to talk about the events that happened in Q1 and we're going to do a revision for that. And now we're only going to talk about the events that happened in Q3. We're going to do a revision for that. So this is something that we're talking about internally. And the key is that we need to do it in a way that works, like you said, for the ECs, but also works for the program information and really works for the data integrity. So I want everyone to hear that this is something that we're working on. We're not disregarding the fact that, as event data becomes known, multiple revisions become needed, and that's a concern for you guys having to submit these revisions. In the near term, the short answer is that we need to know the best information about the risk events, the most correct information at a quarterly cadence. So again, not, you don't need to tell us immediately. You need to tell us by the next quarter. longer term, we're looking at how to reduce the number of revisions while still maintaining the integrity of the event information and also the data freshness in the way that the program needs. So does that kind of answer your question about where the requirements coming from and kind of how we're looking at it?
Yes, I understand, and I appreciate the clarification. Thank you for that, and I'm glad to hear that you guys are looking at it internally as well. For us, right, to give those updated unknowns, we would have to regenerate the entire report again to see if something had changed between last quarter and this quarter, if any of those unknowns became updated. And that's what we're just trying to avoid is, right, the need to maybe regenerate multiple QDRs every quarter because something may have gotten updated. And then even then, we don't have the ability to see what has been updated because there's so many records as part of the feature class. So we're not able to do that comprehensive view. And so, yes, an annual true up or rolling quarterly updates, I think that would help you guys get the information that you are looking for that remains the most up-to-date information about the events without the need to receive multiple QDRs.
Okay, and I think also just based on your comment and other comments we've gotten about this, this is possible something that we might do like a dedicated public workshop for so that we can really better understand how the systems involved are working. Obviously, all the electric corporations have their own data management systems. And so we're trying to do requirements that, you know, meet energy safety's needs and then kind of aligning those with like many electric corporations data management, right? So I think this is the type of thing that would be really great for a dedicated workshop. And, you know, we'll be circling back internally. And then if there's, you know, interest in participating in something like that, I think it would be a good idea to hear from everyone on that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Melissa. Are there other, let me see, I don't see other hands. Okay, it looks like a chat item. This is from Zoe Harold. Will the OEIS data team make the workshop slides and workshop recording available before the public comment deadline? Yes, the presentation, the slide deck will be posted. I don't know how long it takes to turn around the workshop recording, but I will, oh, sorry, everyone. Yeah, I will make that link available as soon as possible. And again, that'll just be posted to the e-filing, to the docket. Anyone else have questions or comments? Just give it one more minute. Let everyone's brains think. It's not speak now or forever hold your peace. We have extended the public comment period until a week from today. So that stakeholders have time to incorporate the information that was presented in this workshop today into your written comments. And so it's looking like I'm not seeing any raised hands or any further entries into the chat or the Q&A. So Noe, can you go ahead to the next slide? Just double checking. Yes, it's a thank you. So just double checking. You never know what could be lurking there. Thank you guys so much for, oh wait, someone's getting in a last minute question. See, we just had to advance the slide and scare you guys that we were going to close the meeting. Does table 6 report only CPUC reportable ignitions, or does it include all ignitions? Reportable ignitions are defined in our terms definition in the data guidelines. So please double check that. And then if that doesn't answer your question, please submit clarification as to why that does not answer the question in your written comments for the comment period. That was for Charles Madison. Yeah, go ahead and look. It's still referenced in our definition of terms, like the glossary of the data guidelines. So if you don't see that, if it's not clear there, please let us know why that's not clear. Very minor, but okay, this is Aaron. Very minor, but there were numbering discrepancies in the quarterly template. The last two tables. Number should start with a 2, not 1. We'll note that and check it out.
Are you talking about, the, like, in the slides? Because it's very possible I just grabbed, some stuff from some other table and didn't check it's consistent in the slides, but in the actual templates themselves, they should follow the structure that we said. I'll check and see if the
Yeah.
slides are, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, let me just see. I had it written. Okay, so the annual should have a prefix of 2, I believe. So it's just table 14 and 15 have so it's not the quarterly, it's the annual has a prefix of 1. So it's just very minor. Table
Oh.
14, 15 isn't in alignment with the rest. So just that the prefix is different in those two tables.
Thank you for flagging that. You've detected that we were originally doing that in the quarterly, and that was what the script was done
No
for.
problem.
Fix it. So thank you. I will fix that.
I
Thank
just
you
corrected my
for-
comment.
Our eagle-eye stakeholders, we appreciate all of your help with stuff like that and catching things.
We're gonna need to assign some sort of a bounty on that. We owe Aaron something.
Or just like we have our friend of data status.
Stickers, yeah.
Yeah, we have
Maybe
our
free
status.
stickers.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. And again, anything that we didn't cover, didn't address, whatever your thoughts are, please provide them in your written comments on the docket in response to the draft data guidelines version 4.0 before 1 week from today. And we thank you guys. So this question was asked earlier, the geodatabase and status report template. So Brian, I think we're trying to get those out. In the past, we've never done drafts of those. It sounds like we're going to be doing drafts of those going forward. If we're worried about finding errors, then we can correct those errors when we find them. But if we can get them out ahead of the adoption, that's what we're going to go for, right?
Yes, we will target that. They don't have a hard date that I can commit to, but it'll be as soon as possible based on whether we determine that we need to make any further changes.
Okay. And thank you guys for flagging that. This is part of kind of the maturing all of this stuff, incorporating everything into the guidelines, and going forward, we'll be providing that as a draft geodatabase and recognizing that you guys are looking to review it earlier. So thank you for that. Okay. Oh, see, every time I say we're going to end, Jonathan Morales, our IOUs to implement changes with Q4 2024 QDR or with Q1 2025 QDR. So this would be Q1 2025. What you will find is that the annual WMP data set will arrive before that. So when these guidelines take effect will occur first on the annual WMP data set, not on Q1. I mean, assuming, that I know that ESPD kind of staggers the WMP. So, whenever your WMP comes, but the earliest WMP submissions will fall before Q1 2025 quarterly data submission. And Q4 2024 will be on version 3.2. Yep. All right. Thank you guys for participating, and we hope that you are all safe and enjoying the rest of your day. Thank you guys. Bye.